I knew it was almost time, that my ministry was coming to a close. Soon I would be fulfilling God's plan, our plan of saving the world and atoning for sin. But first it was time for one more meal with my disciples. I had so much more I wanted to tell them, so much more to say to prepare them for the events to come. Yes, I had already tried to tell them what was to come, but I knew they were still confused, still expecting the joy and cheers of Hosanna from Sunday to continue forever. The Passover feast would be the perfect time for preparing their hearts and minds, to give them the strength and encouragement they would need for this long night, the disappointment and the sorrow that was to come. I needed them to remember my words in their time of trial so that they would continue to trust in God and in me. And of course they would need to remember my words for all the ministry they would do after the resurrection. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I had asked the disciples to prepare the feast. They had made all the usual arrangements for the meal in the house of the man I had sent them to. We began the feast in the same way that has happened in many households and has happened for many years. The disciples did not yet know that tonight would be different. I tried to tell them that the hour had come and that this was the last meal I would eat with them. But oh, my disciples, how I love them, and yet how much they have missed of my teaching. They began fighting again about who was the greatest and who would sit in the places of honor. How would I explain it to them again? How could I cultivate a servant's heart within them? The gospel is based on love for God and for others. They needed to understand this vital teaching. They needed a way to see the heart of a servant in action. I got up from the table, wrapped a towel around my waist, and began to wash the disciples' feet. Oh, if you could have seen the looks on their faces, to see their Lord and teacher performing this act that was reserved for the lowest servant. And Peter, oh, how I love him. And oh, how he tries so hard to always have the right answer. He wasn't going to let me wash his feet. His pride was getting in the way of receiving this gift. But then when I told him it had to happen, of course he wanted all the way in, asking me to wash all of him. I love his enthusiasm. I told him he only needed his feet washed, and then went on teaching the lesson. I told them, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them.
It was a dinner with Jesus, just like any other we'd had in the past. But something was different this time. Something was different in me. Evil had come into my heart. The temptation was getting stronger. And I thought if I acted normal, if I acted like everything was okay, none of the others would suspect that I'd gone to the priest and struck a deal to help them arrest Jesus. All that was left was for me to find a time and a place to take the priests so that they could arrest Jesus secretly. I took the bribe money and tried to keep calm. So that at the dinner, no one would know what I did. All that was left was for me to just get through this meal and then meet up with the priests to tell them where he was going. I should have known that nothing would really be secret from Jesus. I was so wrapped up in what I was thinking of where to get him alone, when to get him alone, that I wasn't really seeing anything that was happening there at the meal. And because of that, I almost missed something new and unexpected that Jesus did. On the table was this loaf of bread and glass of wine. He took them and he raised them up and he blessed them and asked us to partake. And then he asked us to thank God for the blessings that we were about to receive. I thought it was so strange that he would say these things. He would ask us to remember about the bread being his body and the wine being his blood. To remember that, I thought to myself, why do we need to remember someone who's sitting right in front of us, in the same room as us? Anyway, like I said, I was only half listening until Jesus brought up something that made the room go almost dead silent. Jesus said to us that one of us was going to betray him. And I stopped immediately and paid attention a little bit more. because every one of us, including myself, was confused as to how he would think such a thing, let alone know that I was the one or that anyone would betray him. There was so much silence in that moment. Felt like it would last forever. Disciples looked back and forth at each other, wondering who it might be. Each one of us, one by one, asked, could it be me? Am I the one who will betray you? I stood up and asked as well, as to not arouse suspicion towards myself being the one who actually betrayed him. And Jesus responded later, it is one of the 12. It is the one whose hand is dipping into the cup. In that moment, I looked down and saw that it was my hand that was in the cup. I don't know how he knew. So much discussion was happening across the table. I only thought was I had to get out of there because I was expected by the priests to meet with them so that they could know when and where to arrest Jesus. I had to leave. I don't know how he knew, but somehow he did. Somehow he knew it was me. I stood there for so long, telling myself that I needed to get out of there. I needed to meet with the priests. I needed to take them to Gethsemane because that's where Jesus was gonna be. Whenever Jesus would visit Jerusalem, the garden was his favorite place to visit. And I knew that that was the place that I needed to take them. Because Jesus would be almost completely alone. He loved the quiet time away from the crowds and from everything, just so he can pray. If the other disciples knew about my plan, they would try to stop me, and they'd spoil everything.
The Garden of Gethsemane. At one time, it was one of my favorite places. I loved the quiet, the time away from the crowds that were always following us. Jesus, the disciples, and myself, that is. But one night changed it all. That night, the quietness of the garden was shattered by the angry mob. We headed from the Passover feast to the garden. Of course, we were all still a little shaken up after all things Jesus said about going away and our need to be prepared. And then there was the part about betrayal and Judas running from the room. I was especially troubled, as Jesus had told me that I would say that I did not know him. When we arrived at the garden, Jesus told us he would go a little further to pray by himself, but that we should remain awake and pray. I tried to stay awake. I tried to keep praying, but my mind quickly began to wander. I thought of the events of the day. I struggled with what was said, and I kept telling myself that I would never deny knowing Christ. In all my thinking, I must have drifted off to sleep. Then Jesus was at my side, telling me to wake up, to stay alert, and to pray. Christ left again to pray, and again I must have fallen asleep along with the other disciples. We awoke suddenly. There were torches, soldiers, a mob with clubs. I had a short sword, and I jumped to my feet, swinging. I was determined to prove my allegiance to my Lord. I had a fair shot at one of them, too, but he moved his head at the last instant, and all I got was his ear. Jesus corrected me, told me to put up the sword. I thought I knew what he wanted of me, but I had so much still to learn, so much to understand about love and service. Then it was all noise and confusion. They took him and nearly trampled us. By the time we figured out what was going on, they were gone. The quiet of the garden was no longer a comfort, but a reminder that the Lord had been taken.
I am one of the chief priests in Jerusalem. We have charge over all the functions of the temple. It is our sacred office to offer sacrifices in the temple for the glory of God and the redemption of his people. It is the highest office in the land, and with the scribes, we are the most powerful religious leaders in Israel. Our authority is unquestioned. Everyone knows us. From the Old Testament times, we have been God's chosen people, his official ministers. So it has always been, so it shall always be. We view any circumstance which might upset this order with extreme concern. The recent case of Jesus, the troublemaker from Galilee, proves my point. You understand, his teachings have disturbed the people and have even called our temple practices into question. A dangerous man. He has challenged an authority and practices that began long ago. Certainly we have encountered similar challenges before, those who would destroy, cloaking themselves in the disguise of reform, but none as dangerous as this Jesus of Nazareth. His followers have numbered in the thousands. Some even dare to claim that he may be the long-awaited Messiah. But surely, if that were so, we in the priesthood should have been among the first to be told. No, I am afraid the people are too easily confused. You see, we have been aware of this man for quite some time. The trial was critical. We had to work quickly and carefully. Our charges against Jesus had to be proven by witnesses. Regrettably, we were forced to pay certain witnesses for their testimony. Their testimony was not as compelling as one would wish, but it did open the way for direct examination, and soon he was condemned by his own lips. He blasphemed, that is, insulted God openly before the council. I mean, how could he say that he is the Son of God? How ridiculous it seemed to us. Having gained Caiaphas' sentence, all we needed was the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. We are not allowed to carry out capital punishment without his approval. We have learned how to play our cases before the Romans. All the governor cares about is the authority of Rome. All we had to do was convince him that this Jesus was the dangerous rebel. It was daybreak. We arrived at the governor's residence and called for a hearing. Sleepy-eyed and disinterested, Pilate heard our charges. We suffered some anxious moments as Pilate played the stupid Roman, adopting the position that Jesus had done nothing wrong. Clearly, this would not do. We were so close to the final solution. We had paid a disciple to betray him. We had paid witnesses for their testimony. We could not be stopped just one step short of the goal. As Pilate interviewed Jesus, we worked our way through the crowd, stirring up anger. So when Pilate stood him before us, the crowd answered with one voice, ours. Crucify him! The chant surged through the crowd like an angry serpent. The governor took our message, Jesus must die. Pilate was in no mood for a fight. He released Jesus to the crowd, and he was taken out of the city to the place of the skull and crucified as a common criminal. Our work was finished.
I've pondered these things in my heart. I've been thinking and praying since the moment the angel told me that I was to have a son and that he would be the Son of God. And yet in all my thinking, I could have never prepared myself for this. Jesus had told us that this was the hour for which he came from the Father. He said he was laying down his life of his own choosing, that no one was taking it from him. And yet nothing prepares a mother's heart for this much sorrow. I saw it all, from the day he was born to his last breath. I was there. I was there for his days of ministry, for the healings and the teachings. I saw miracles with my own eyes, accomplished by my Son through the power of God. I was there as the tensions began to mount throughout Jerusalem. Then the leaders in Jerusalem arrested him and killed him. I stood at his cross and watched him die. I wept to see him suffer. The Roman soldiers were cruel. Our leaders were no better. The chief priests and scribes made fun of him in his pain. But we, a few of his closest friends and I, stayed there all day. From the morning when they drove the nails through his hands and feet into the cross, until it was over and the soldier drove a spear into his side. But through my pain and my grief, I still have hope. For everything that my son said came true, and I believe that it will not be different this time. Jesus said that he would be back again, that he was making a place for me, for all of us, with God, a place in heaven for all who believe. I trust that my son's words will ring true, the same as always. But when he returns, something will be different. I will. Because he was in my life, because he showed me the way to God, and because I believe he will return one day, I am forever changed. Are you?